Welcome back to Monkey Wrench Engineering. This is our second KSP 1.05 flight tutorial, or really just an introduction to flight. We did a basic jet last time. We're going to look at the sort of less than satisfying middle tier between your basic airplane and your first single stage to orbit SSTO spaceplane. The second group of parts you're going to open up are the Mark II parts. It does take a little work, and they are a little farther up the tree. They do start to give you some options, though, to do some interesting things. I was going to do a pre-made plane, but then decided most people actually want to see how a plane is constructed, especially if they haven't done it before. So we'll try to be fairly speedy and make something reasonably basic. I'm going to actually just build a very straightforward sub-orbital craft. This quite likely will not manage to make orbit. I'd actually be quite surprised if it did. Stranger things have happened, but I'm certainly not planning on it. The Mark II parts, the Mark II parts, as you can see, are aerodynamic. They do actually provide some lift in and of themselves. You will still need wings, of course, but the body does give you some aid. Since we're moving to the point where we're starting to look at the engines you'll be using at this point will likely be the Whiplashes, which are a ramjet. While there are an intermediate engine, the Panther, which are actually a very nice engine. We'll grab a pair of them real quick. The Panther is an afterburner equipped, effectively it's a fighter jet engine. It's highly maneuverable. It can run dry or wet mode with the afterburners on. It's not something that's suitable for a space plane, but if you're interested in zooming around and flying and dogfighting, they're brilliant. Anyone that plays with the BD Armory mod, which is an aerial combat mod, will likely have some videos showing Panthers in action. We're going to be using the Whiplashes. They are the interim engine that opens once you've opened the basic wheelsy turbofan engine, which is effectively just a large Juno. And they are your I can just about go to space engine. In a perfect world, we would pair those with the toroidal aerospikes, which open actually at the same time. The aerospikes are good in an atmosphere or out. They are a rocket engine. That's why we have the central fuselage of this is full of rocket fuel. We do have liquid fuel in the saddle tanks, which is what our Whiplashes are going to be using. Conveniently, at the same time you open the Whiplash, you open this. This is an engine pre-cooler. This is the best intake that's in the game at this point. It's very effective, it's very efficient, and it may very well get a nerf as we go along, to be honest, because it is quite good at what it does. Actually, you know what? Just for giggles, well, I was going to put an avionics pack in there, but where has my... Oh, it would be in here. Put an avionics pack in there. Assuming we can get this to orbit, we do not have an RCS system on it. We do now have a torque wheel, which we can actually disable for flight. We're not going to need that while we're flying. We may need that if we do manage to get into orbit to do some maneuvering. And since this potentially could get to orbit, we'll go ahead and put a pair of folding solar panels in the cargo bay. See, make sure it closes correctly. It does. That way, once we're actually in space, which I don't think we'll get to, could deploy those for additional power. I'm a little paranoid about cargo bays. I tend to strut them internally just to give a little added strength to the plane. But we are going to be running the engines on this since we have a mixed engined plane. We'll be setting up action groups, and I'll be showing you how to do that Space planes tend to use action groups all the time for their engine systems. Once you have these engines and the Mark II fuselage open, you will have things like the delta wing, which we are going to use as our basic wing for this plane. And you'll notice our center of lift is too far forward. That's fine. We haven't even put control surfaces on this yet. Those will move it back. So same as with the basic plane, you need control surfaces, obviously. You do want your tail as far back as possible on a plane, so we'll push it back there. Looking pretty good. Not thrilled with where the center of lift is, although the center of mass on this plane, the center of mass on this plane will be shifting back, I believe, as we drain fuel, which is going to make us unstable. So we're probably going to have to do a little messing around to make sure this plane actually flies properly. Again, landing gear. I'm still going to use the small gear on this plane. They should be more than sufficient. And they are steerable, which is very nice. Again, gear behind the center of mass, but only just. Be conscious of, during takeoff and landing, the possibility of tail strike. I would like our center of lift to be a little farther back. Or conversely, I'd like our center of mass to be a little farther forward. That being the case, we're going to add a little extra fuel. That moved our center of mass forward a bit. Now I'm somewhat concerned about the amount of lift surfaces we have or don't have, as the case may be on this aircraft. The advanced canards should be open for you by the time you're playing with the Whiplash. Okay, right now this plane is unstable. The center of lift is ahead of the center of mass severely enough that this will be interesting to fly as is. So, grabbing the wings entirely, we're going to scoot those back to there. And we're actually going to scoot the landing gear up a little bit. Now, on paper, that should work. In reality, I don't think we've got enough lifting surfaces for the mass of this plane, but we'll see. Excuse me. Action groups. That's the little hammer and wrench symbol when you're in the vehicle, not the vehicle assembly building, but the spaceplane hangar. It's available in both. Click that. You'll see all of the stock action groups already exist. We're going to use Custom 1 as our first action group. We will click the Whiplashes. See, they go an odd navy blue, and they're showing here. In Custom 1, we want to be able to toggle engine on the Whiplashes. That'll allow us to turn them on and off as we desire. For Custom 2, we'll click on the aerospikes, and we'll toggle engine there. Okay, we can now turn the aerospikes on by hitting 1. We can turn them off by hitting 1. We can turn the Whiplashes on or off with 1, and the aerospikes on or off with 2. That's obviously very handy. You can do other things as well. Custom 3, we have the engine pre-coolers. We'll toggle intake with 3. That allows us to close and open the intakes as we desire. If you close the intakes, you have less drag. So when you're in the upper atmosphere and switching over to your rocket engines, you can close those. Might get you a little more effective delta V. Drill is the same on the ground. We'll hit brakes, we'll turn the landing lights on just so we can see the runway even better. T for SAS, Z for full thrust, 1 to toggle the Whiplashes on. Take the brakes off. Yep, it'll just take off at 100. which is not terrible for a spaceplane. They do tend to have a high landing speed. As we climb, we are watching the specific, or we're watching the thrust rating on these engines. It's currently climbing. As we're going faster and the ramjets are sucking in more air, we're getting more thrust. So as long as we're seeing thrust rise, we're at 137 newtons and going up. We see speed rising at the same time. This is a fairly stable angle of attack. So we're going to go ahead and stay on this vector for a little bit. To get a spaceplane into orbit, the trick is to get as much speed as you can out of the jets before you switch over to your rocket systems. We're at 8 kilometers altitude. We're still building thrust. We're going to flatten out our climb a little bit. Thrust is getting close to 300 kilonewtons. Altitude is 12,000 meters. So we're going to flatten out. We're at 14,000 meters and climbing very slowly. We are about to hit a kilometer per second, and we are over a kilometer per second in velocity. Heating is obviously an issue that we want to keep an eye on. We're starting to lose thrust in the engines as we're getting higher. Approaching 1,200 meters per second. I'm going to pitch down and try to get a little more speed. There's 1,200 meters per second. Engines are at 143 and dropping. Altitude at 16,000 and rising. We're at 1,251 meters per second. I'm going to pitch up, which does knock some speed off. But I do want to get altitude. We're going to go into our burn climb here shortly. 18,000. Once the air gets thin enough, we're going to lose the whiplashes, and we're going to need to toggle our aerospikes on with key 2 using the action groups. The thrust on these has dropped to 45, 44, 43, 42, 41, going down rapidly. We're going to lose those any second. I'm going to trigger the aerospikes and briefly run on both systems. Aerospikes are on, pitching up to get additional altitude. We are now burning through fuel at a horrific rate. Yep, we just heard the whiplashes drop dead. We will hit 1 to turn those off. We will hit 3 and close the intakes on the pre-coolers. We're currently showing an apoapsis of 48,000. We're not going to have the sort of fuel we need to actually make orbit and circularize. Pitching down a little bit. Oh, stop thrust. Our apoapsis is at 80 kilometers. This may not make orbit, but it's not going to be far short of it. So, this plane, assuming we actually had the delta V to do this burn, which we don't. Yeah, it's showing a 29-second burn. We might be able to make orbit with this. We may end up stuck in orbit, but we'll go ahead and see. We're at 59,000, 60,000 meters. Not enough air up here to matter. So we will go ahead and extend our solar panels. just for steering, since we are effectively now in a vacuum, we'll turn that reaction wheel on. We're now over 70,000, 71, 72,000 meters. We're getting a lovely view of the planet. 15 seconds out from the node, we will burn and attempt to make orbit. I do not think we have the fuel to do so. Oh, we may. We're actually... Oh, you bugger. It's not transferring liquid fuel as neatly as it could. So we're going to go ahead and dump from the jet engines into the main tank. And we may discover we actually do have plenty to circularize, because we were not... Oh, we're missing our burn. Fuel lines set up properly would have solved that, but beggars can't be choosers. Well, there's orbit. 7590, not even a very bad orbit, actually a pretty good orbit. So that rig did manage to get to orbit. We've actually got 131 oxidizer left and actually a lot of liquid fuel. So we are in a position to do several orbits, deorbit, and try to land this. So that's excellent. With as much liquid fuel as we still have in the various tanks on this, I think this could actually have taken a small payload up here. So that's reasonably impressive for a very basic whiplash aerospike spaceplane. So this, assuming we can land it, this will count as an SSTO. So we're going to go ahead and turn to face retrograde, same as you would with just a regular everyday rocket. Okay, so we are going to be dropping to 20. I came in a little low. We're going to be dropping to 20,000, which is fine. We're going to go ahead and turn around prograde again. Landing is probably, well, re-entry and landing are the two most difficult tasks with a spaceplane. I mean, we do have a lot of fuel in the aerospikes. It's not really going to be doing us a lot of good. We don't want to actually be entering the atmosphere backwards trying to brake. So effectively, that's just dead weight. The liquid fuel we will be using, of course, in the jets if we can survive and get back to the atmosphere. Stability assist on just hold steady. And let the nose pitch up as we accelerate. The nose actually isn't pitching up. The planet's just curving away beneath us as we orbit. Okay, 56,000 feet. You'll notice the cockpit is starting to show some red. We're going to make sure we're coming in level and at close to a 45-degree deflection. That is intentional. We're coming in, some people call it a cobra approach. We're coming in flared to try to lose as much velocity as we can, as high in the atmosphere as we can before things start getting really hot. We are in fact losing tiny amounts of velocity even now. We are still going more than 2,200 meters per second, however, and I'm starting to worry about the glow a little bit. That cockpit is getting quite hot. (1,600 meters per second at 3,500, 1,500 meters per second). Okay, we can actually start bringing that down some. Still draining electrical power. I'm going to go ahead and hit 3 and reopen our air intakes. 900 meters per second. We're going to flatten out. There we go. So we've got a vertical speed of minus 127 meters per second. So we're going down quite quickly. But our horizontal speed is dropping as well. .900 and lower. We're going to pitch the nose down a little bit. Try to figure out where the glide path is. 16,000 meters. I'm going to go ahead and turn the whiplashes back on. We'll make sure the aerospikes are off. Throttle them up to just a cruising level. Or you can watch the dawn from your transonic spaceplane. Again, the only reason I'm flying to the dawn side is so I can see where I'm landing. And of course, we don't know how this thing actually handles. We've never maneuvered with it. We've simply put it into orbit. Answer so far is it doesn't seem to handle terribly. So we're cruising along at about 190, 200 meters per second. We are losing altitude, but not at a tremendous pace, about 32 meters per second, which is fine because we're still 5 kilometers high. Lowering the gear just so I don't forget to do it later. Same with the brakes. If you do mount air brakes on a spaceplane, which can be useful, you deploy them when you're hitting brakes unless you set them up on a separate action group. I'll pull the nose up a bit, get a little bit of altitude. I have to watch our speed though so we don't stall. Spaceplanes do not glide very well. Yeah, we can maybe land on this. It doesn't give me a ton of confidence, but let's find out. We've throttled the engines back. Make sure that we're not losing too much. Oh, there's the ground already. Trying to flare and lose some of our speed. Oh, it's an uphill. Oh, it's an uphill. Uphill landings are painful. And we're down. And so that's all there is to that. Obviously, landing at KSC would have made life a little easier, but the boys can recover from here. So just as a quick summary, this plane, which I did not expect to make orbit, did. Very simple. We have a basic set of liquid oxygen and fuel through the main fuselage of the plane. We even had enough spare to mess around to put a cargo bay on. This is powering 2 aerospikes. You have 2 liquid fuel tanks and a pair of pre-coolers attached to your 2 whiplashes, and this will make orbit. I didn't have a ton of excess fuel, but frankly there was enough left in the tanks. We could have done a rendezvous with another ship, which means that something like this, you could make this smaller and lighter by getting rid of some of the junk. Could be a nice little way to recover Kerbals from orbit. But there's your first. That's your first space plane. It's literally that simple. It's no harder than the original plane you made. The speeds are greater. Your angle of attack, reaching orbit, is important. And as always, the most important things are looking at your center of lift and your center of mass. Okay, thanks. That's it for this one, and you have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.